My wife forbid my whole family from seeing our newborn, yet her family visited daily. You won't believe the cold, calculated cruelty I discovered hiding behind my wife's smile. It wasn't just about keeping my family away from our newborn. It was a premeditated plan to break their spirits, a betrayal so deep, it shattered my world and left me wondering, how did I not see it? Our daughter was born just 3 weeks ago, and since then, my wife, Jessica, has flat out refused to let any of my family meet her. Not my parents, who live literally 20 minutes away. Not my sister, who flew in from across the country, planning her whole trip around this moment. And not even my 92-year-old grandmother, who doesn't have many chances left. Meanwhile, Jessica's family? Oh, they're practically living here. Her mother? Practically moved into the nursery. Her dad's taken 500 photos already. Her siblings just come and go like they own the place. But when my own mother calls, just asking when she can meet her first grandchild, Jessica starts crying about boundaries, safety, needing space. The excuses kept changing, you know? First, it was germs and the baby's immune system. But get this, her family members were coming straight from jobs at a daycare, a hospital, and a gym. Then it was overwhelming the baby. Yet, her family threw a party in our living room when the baby was 5 days old, with 15 people. Then, establishing routines. But her mother rearranges our entire schedule every time she visits. My mom, bless her heart, offered to wear a mask, wash her hands, stay outside, look through the window, anything, just to see the baby once. Jessica called it creepy and obsessive. When my mom sent a gift, Jessica returned it, saying we didn't have room for more stuff, while her mother had filled the nursery with things we didn't even need or want. I tried talking to Jessica about fairness. She just snapped, life isn't fair. You need to respect me as a mother. I went through labor, so I get to make the rules. When I pointed out I was the father, she said I didn't understand the bond between a mother and child, and that I was being controlling. Her mother backed her up, looking at me like I was some kind of abuser for wanting my own family to meet my daughter. It was insane. My sister had taken time off work, bought a plane ticket, booked a hotel, all to meet her niece. Jessica knew this for months. But when my sister arrived, Jessica suddenly developed anxiety about visitors and said she couldn't handle anyone outside her immediate support system, which, apparently, only included her blood relatives. My sister sat in her hotel room for 4 days, waiting for permission, before flying home, heartbroken. Jessica then posted on social media about how hard motherhood was, while her friends commented how amazing she was doing. My father-in-law posted photos holding the baby with captions about being the world's proudest grandpa. When my dad commented, asking when he could meet her, Jessica deleted his comment and blocked him. She told me he was aggressive and boundary crossing. But the real breaking point? It came when my grandmother called from the hospital. She'd had a fall, needed surgery. She just asked if she could see a photo of the baby before her operation, just in case. Jessica heard me on the phone and started screaming that I was emotionally manipulating her, using my grandmother's health. She grabbed my phone, told my grandmother she was toxic for guilt-tripping a new mother, and hung up. My grandmother was so confused, she thought she'd done something terrible. That's when Jessica's sister, Amy, pulled me aside. She'd been watching everything, and she couldn't stay quiet anymore. And what she told me, it was a punch to the gut. The real reason Jessica was keeping my family away? Before we got married, Jessica had been engaged to someone else, a guy named Christopher. His mother had been incredibly involved in the wedding planning, and Jessica had hated it. When they broke up, Jessica swore she'd never let another mother-in-law near any future children she had. Amy said Jessica had been planning this since she got pregnant, telling her family she was going to establish dominance early and make sure my mother knew her place, which was nowhere near the baby. Amy said Jessica had a whole strategy about making my family beg and grovel, then still say no to break their spirits. She wanted them to give up trying entirely so she'd never have to deal with them. Then, Amy showed me the proof. Text messages. Jessica bragging about making my sister waste money on a trip for nothing, saying it would teach her not to assume she had the right to the baby. Even worse, Amy showed me Jessica's group chat with her friends, where she was laughing about my grandmother being in the hospital. She called her dramatic, said old people always used health scares for attention. She even wrote that she hoped my grandmother would pass before the baby was old enough to remember, just so she wouldn't have to deal with visits. My blood ran cold. I confronted Jessica with the messages. She lunged for Amy's phone to delete them, but Amy had already sent them to me. Jessica screamed that Amy was jealous and a traitor. She said I was choosing my family over her and the baby. I looked her dead in the eye and said, "No. I'm choosing not to let you abuse my family anymore." That day, I took our daughter to meet my parents. Jessica called the police, claiming I'd kidnapped our daughter. The officers arrived, asked if I was the father. I said yes. They told her I had equal rights to take the baby places and left. My jaw dropped. Jessica's mother showed up at my parents' house, screaming my name, demanding I hand over her granddaughter. My father, calm as ever, just held his phone steady, recording every word. My mother stayed inside with the baby, pressed against her shoulder. I stood behind the screen door and, as calmly as I could, explained I was the father and had every right to bring my daughter there. Jessica's mother's face turned beet red. She yelled I was a kidnapper, that Jessica was having a panic attack because of what I'd done. My father kept filming, silent, just documenting. Then she threatened me. "I'll call my lawyer. You'll never see your daughter again. Jessica will get full custody, and you'll be lucky to get supervised visits once a month." My father zoomed in, getting every word. After 20 minutes of screaming, she finally peeled out of the driveway, nearly hitting the mailbox. My parents and I just stood there in silence. My mother asked if I was okay. I honestly didn't know how to answer. I drove home 3 hours later, knowing I needed to talk to Jessica, really talk about our marriage, about whether we could fix this. As I pulled into the driveway, every light in the house was on. Shadows moved past the windows. I walked in, and found Jessica's entire family in our living room. Her father stood up first, yelling before I even closed the door. He called me a kidnapper, said I'd traumatized his daughter, demanded to know what kind of man takes a baby from her mother without permission. Jessica's mother joined in, saying I was dangerous, that they should call the police again. Her brother accused me of being controlling, her sister said I was abusive. They all talked over each other, a wall of noise and anger. Jessica sat in the middle of the couch, holding our daughter, tears streaming down her face, looking at me like I was a stranger who'd broken into her home. I tried to speak, but her father cut me off, stepping closer, pointing his finger at my chest. Her mother pulled out her phone and started recording me, saying she wanted evidence of my aggressive behavior. I just stood there, hands at my sides, not moving, not yelling back, letting them attack. Jessica cried, playing the victim. That's when I finally understood. She'd already told them her version of events. Already painted me as the villain, made herself the innocent mother protecting her baby from her unstable husband. Nothing I said would matter. She'd gotten to them first. I asked if we could talk privately. Jessica shook her head, saying anything I had to say could be said in front of her family. Her mother agreed, saying Jessica needed their support and protection. I looked at my wife, holding our daughter, and saw a stranger looking back. Her family didn't leave until after midnight, each of them warning me they were watching me, that they'd protect Jessica and the baby no matter what. When the last car pulled away, Jessica and I sat in cold silence. The baby slept in her bassinet between us. She looked at me. "You have a choice to make," she said. "You can apologize to my entire family for what you did, admit you were wrong to take the baby without my permission, and promise never to let your family near our daughter without my explicit approval. Or you can refuse, and I'll make sure you regret it for the rest of your life." I told her, quietly, that I wasn't apologizing for letting my parents meet their granddaughter. She picked up the bassinet, walked to our bedroom, and locked the door behind her. I spent the night on the couch, staring at the ceiling, listening to the baby cry through the walls while Jessica refused to let me in to help. The next morning, her family's attack began in full force. My phone started buzzing before 7 a.m. with texts from her mother, her siblings, her father, all telling me I needed to apologize. Jessica's mother posted vaguely on social media about protecting babies from dangerous people. Her friends piled on. Her father shared articles about parental rights and custody battles, with pointed captions about fathers who try to control their families. By noon, my own relatives were calling me, asking if everything was okay. I tried explaining, but it sounded crazy even to my own ears. My wife won't let my family meet the baby, but her family visits every day. She called the police when I took our daughter to meet my parents. Now her whole family is attacking me online. It sounded like I was the problem. Jessica refused to speak to me directly, sending all communication through her mother, who called every few hours with new ultimatums. By the end of the second day, I had over 100 messages painting me as an unstable father who'd kidnapped his own child. Then Amy showed up at my workplace during lunch, looking over her shoulder like she was being followed. She had her laptop. We sat in my car, and she opened a private online group chat that made my stomach churn. Jessica had been documenting her strategy since month 6 of her pregnancy. Advice from other women on how to legally exclude in-laws, how to establish sole control. Messages going back months, showing Jessica researching parental rights laws, asking how to build a case for me being unstable, celebrating every time she successfully kept my family away from doctor appointments. One woman told Jessica to document everything I did wrong, even small things, to build a pattern of concerning behavior. Another suggested Jessica talk to a lawyer before the baby was born. Jessica had responded, saying she'd already consulted with someone and knew exactly what she needed to do. Amy scrolled through message after message, a cold, calculated plan to control access to our daughter. I took a personal day and drove to meet Samir Carlson, a family law attorney my sister had found. His office felt too expensive for me, but I had no choice. Samir reviewed everything: Amy's screenshots, the police report from Jessica's false kidnapping claim, the video my father had taken of Jessica's mother threatening me. He explained I had equal parental rights, that Jessica couldn't legally prevent me from taking our daughter places, and that her behavior could actually work against her in custody. He asked if I wanted to save the marriage or file for separation. I didn't know. I just needed to protect my family's right to see their granddaughter. Samir said he'd draft a letter to Jessica, outlining my rights and her obligations, and if she interfered, we'd file for formal custody. Jessica somehow found out I'd met with an attorney within hours. I suspect her mother was following me or checking my credit card statements. When I got home that evening, the locks were changed on our bedroom and the nursery. A note on the door told me to sleep in the guest room until I came to my senses. I tried calling Jessica, voicemail. Her mother answered on the second ring when I called her, saying she'd moved in to support Jessica during this difficult time. She said Jessica and the baby were sleeping in the nursery, and I wasn't welcome in either room until I apologized. I asked where I was supposed to sleep, and she said the guest room was perfectly comfortable. That night, I checked our bank accounts. Jessica had changed all the passwords and moved most of our money into accounts with only her name. My mother, desperate, found a professional mediator, hoping to resolve this before it became a full legal battle. Surprisingly, Jessica agreed, as long as her mother could attend. The mediation happened in a neutral office. Me and my parents on one side, Jessica and her mother on the other. The mediator tried to facilitate, but within 15 minutes, it was a disaster. Jessica's mother dominated, interrupting, speaking for Jessica, rejecting every suggestion before Jessica could even respond. The mediator repeatedly asked her to let Jessica speak. But Jessica just cried, repeating that I'd betrayed her trust. My parents offered compromises, supervised visits, short meetings, whatever Jessica needed. Her mother rejected everything, saying my family couldn't be trusted, that they'd encouraged me to take the baby without permission. Jessica nodded along, never contradicting her. The mediator finally suggested a break. When we returned, Jessica and her mother announced they were leaving. Clearly a waste of time. 2 days later, someone walked into my office carrying a manila envelope. I got served with legal papers right there in front of my coworkers. Jessica had filed for an emergency custody order, claiming I'd kidnapped our daughter, exhibited unstable and threatening behavior, and that she feared for the baby's safety in my care. The petition included statements from her mother and 2 friends, describing me as controlling and aggressive. It painted a picture that wasn't true, but sounded terrible on paper. I forwarded the documents to Samir immediately. His voice was tight with urgency. The emergency hearing was in 5 days. We needed to prepare. The hearing took place in a small courtroom. Jessica's lawyer presented her as a frightened new mother protecting her infant from an unstable father. Samir stood up. He presented the text messages Amy had provided. The judge put on her reading glasses. She read through Jessica's own words about breaking their spirits and making them beg and grovel. She looked up at Jessica with clear disapproval. "Are you aware, counsel," she asked Jessica's lawyer, "that your client documented her intentions to manipulate custody access?" Jessica's face went white. The judge continued reading. She read out loud the message where Jessica laughed about my grandmother in the hospital, calling her dramatic, saying, "Old people always used health scares for attention." Then she read the part where Jessica wrote she hoped my grandmother would pass before the baby was old enough to remember so she wouldn't have to deal with visits. The courtroom went silent. Jessica's lawyer tried to interrupt, but the judge held up her hand and kept reading. Message after message. When she finished, she took off her glasses and looked directly at Jessica with an expression that made even Jessica's mother stop talking. The judge denied the emergency custody request completely. No evidence I posed any danger. Then she ordered a temporary custody arrangement, 3 days with me, 3 days with Jessica, until a full hearing. Jessica started crying, loud sobs. But the judge wasn't done. She mandated family counseling twice a week, and she warned Jessica very clearly, These documented statements about deliberately excluding Mr. my last name's family could be considered parental alienation if this pattern continues. Jessica's mother stood up, arguing with the judge, but she was told to sit down or be removed. The judge set the full custody hearing for 6 weeks away. We left through different exits. I sat in my car for 20 minutes, just processing. 3 days later, I drove to our first mandated counseling session. Jessica was already there with her mother, holding her hand. The therapist, Wilhelmina, called us back to her office. Jessica's mother tried to follow, but Wilhelmina stopped her, parents only. The session started with Wilhelmina asking us to describe what brought us there. Jessica immediately launched into crying, talking about how hard labor was, how overwhelmed she felt, how nobody understood new mothers. She talked for 20 minutes about her birth experience, sleepless nights, how scary it was to be responsible for a tiny human. Wilhelmina listened patiently. Then she asked Jessica directly about the text messages describing her plan to exclude my family. Jessica's whole demeanor changed. She stopped crying. She said those messages were taken out of context, that she was just venting to friends the way all new mothers do, that everyone says things they don't mean when they're stressed. Wilhelmina asked what context would make hoping someone's grandmother dies acceptable. Jessica's face went red. She said Wilhelmina was biased against mothers, that therapists were supposed to be supportive, that she was twisting Jessica's words. Wilhelmina stayed calm, said she was simply reading what Jessica had written. Jessica crossed her arms, refused to talk for the rest of the hour. Wilhelmina documented it. 2 days later, Amy called me at work. Her voice was shaking. "You need to know what just happened." Jessica's mother had shown up at Amy's apartment that morning with $2,000 in cash, spread out on the kitchen table. She begged Amy to tell the court she'd made up the text messages, or that I'd manipulated her, or she'd misunderstood Jessica. Amy had started recording on her phone the moment she realized what was happening. She captured everything, her mother's voice, desperate, offering the money, then threatening to cut Amy off financially, saying the whole family would turn against her, she'd be blamed for destroying Jessica's life. Amy told her mother no. She wasn't going to lie. Her mother left the cash on the table and walked out. Amy forwarded me the recording. I could hear her crying. She said she was done protecting Jessica from her own actions, even if it meant losing her relationship with their mother. Her voice broke when she said it. The first day of my 3-day custody period under the court order felt like Christmas morning. I picked up our daughter from Jessica's mother's house. Jessica handed her over without looking at me. I drove straight to my grandmother's house, where she was recovering from surgery. My whole family was already there. When I walked in, carrying the baby, my grandmother started crying. She held her great-granddaughter for the first time, touching her tiny fingers, looking at her face like she was memorizing every detail. My mother took photos of 4 generations. My grandmother in her recliner, holding the baby. My mother standing behind her. Me beside them. My sister finally got to hold her niece, just staring at her for long minutes. My father sat quietly with the baby sleeping on his chest, his face relaxed in a way I hadn't seen in weeks. Nobody tried to do too much. We just sat together, passing her around gently. My mother made lunch. Everything felt normal and right. My grandmother told me, before I left, that she'd been praying for this moment, that she hadn't been sure she'd live to see it. I had to turn away so she wouldn't see me crying. The 3 days with my family passed too quickly. Sunday evening came. I was supposed to return the baby to Jessica. I drove to our house at 6 o'clock, but Jessica's car wasn't there. I called her phone, voicemail. I texted her, no response. I sat in my car, waiting. 7 o'clock passed, then 8 o'clock. Finally, at 8:15, Jessica's mother texted me, "Jessica isn't ready to take the baby back yet. You need to be more flexible about the schedule." I took screenshots of everything, the unanswered calls, the texts, the timestamps. Then I called Samir. He answered on the second ring. "Contact the police non-emergency line," he said. "Report a custody order violation. Document this officially." I made the call from my driveway. They said they'd send officers to Jessica's location. 2 officers showed up about 30 minutes later. I was waiting outside. Jessica's mother answered the door and immediately started talking about how mothers have more rights than fathers, how the schedule was too rigid. One of the officers, a woman, cut her off mid-sentence. She explained very clearly that the custody order was a court mandate, not a suggestion, and Jessica needed to comply. Jessica's mother argued the court didn't understand new mothers. The officer told her continuing to violate the order could result in contempt of court charges. Jessica finally came to the door, eyes red. The officer asked if she was refusing custody. Jessica reached for the baby, I handed her over, and Jessica started crying dramatically. The officers documented everything. They told us both the next exchange needed to happen on time, or there would be legal consequences. Our next counseling session. Wilhelmina started by saying she'd reviewed her notes. She looked at Jessica. I'm recommending individual therapy to address what I've identified as control issues stemming from past relationship trauma. Jessica's face went pale. She tried to interrupt. Wilhelmina kept talking. She'd noted concerning patterns in how Jessica used the baby as a weapon against my family. She said Jessica was using our daughter to settle old emotional scores from a completely different relationship, and that wasn't healthy. Jessica stood up. You don't understand anything. You're supposed to be helping, but you're making things worse. Wilhelmina stayed calm. She said she was trying to help Jessica see the patterns in her behavior before they damaged her relationship with her daughter permanently. Jessica grabbed her purse and walked out. Wilhelmina wrote something in her notes. She'd be documenting this for the court. Over the next 2 weeks, I started seeing cracks in Jessica's family support system. Amy had completely sided with me and moved out of her parents' house. Then Chase, Jessica's younger brother, started texting me privately. He thought his sister had gone too far. He'd tried talking to Jessica about compromise, and she'd screamed that he was betraying her, that everyone was against her, that she was the victim. Chase told me their father was getting tired of the drama, and just wanted Jessica to work out a reasonable custody arrangement. Jessica's mother was becoming increasingly isolated. Even some of Jessica's friends suggested therapy. Chase sent me screenshots of the family group chat where their father had written that Jessica needed to accept reality and stop fighting a battle she'd already lost. Jessica had responded by leaving the group chat entirely. My phone buzzed. A text from Jessica. Can we meet alone? No lawyers, no family. We agreed to meet in a parking lot, neutral territory. I got there first. When she pulled up, she looked exhausted. We sat in her car because it was raining. Neither of us spoke for a few minutes. Then Jessica started, her voice quiet and shaky. She said she'd been scared since she got pregnant that she'd lose control like she did with Christopher's mother. Seeing my family's excitement had triggered all those old feelings of being overwhelmed and powerless. She admitted Christopher's mother had taken over everything, the wedding planning, their lives, and it had been suffocating. When they broke up, she'd promised herself she'd never feel that powerless again. But she realized now she'd gone too far in the other direction. I told her I understood being hurt by past experiences, that I got why she was scared. But our daughter deserved to know both families. I said I couldn't stay married to someone who would use our child as a weapon to hurt people I loved. That I couldn't watch her punish my family for things Christopher's mother had done. We both cried there in her car. Jessica said she didn't know if she could change enough to make the marriage work. I said I didn't know either. 6 weeks after the emergency hearing, we were back in court for the full custody hearing. Jessica's lawyer presented her side, focusing on bonding and breastfeeding and maternal instinct. Then Samir presented our evidence, the recording of Jessica's mother trying to bribe Amy, the police report from the custody violation, Wilhelmina's detailed notes about Jessica walking out of therapy. Wilhelmina's written report recommended equal custody with structured exchanges, noting Jessica's progress in acknowledging her control issues, but also her continued resistance to allowing my family unsupervised access. The judge read everything carefully. Then she established a permanent custody arrangement, alternating weeks for each of us, with both families allowed to visit during our respective custody times without requiring the other parent's permission. Jessica started crying again, but didn't argue. Her lawyer said they'd comply. I started my individual therapy sessions. Jessica went to hers with a different therapist. Wilhelmina kept working with both of us separately. About 6 weeks into the new schedule, Wilhelmina called me after one of her sessions with Jessica. She asked if we could meet for coffee off the record. We sat in a quiet corner. She told me Jessica was finally doing real work on her trauma from Christopher, instead of blaming everyone else. She'd spent weeks deflecting, but something had shifted. She was starting to acknowledge how she'd recreated the exact control dynamic she'd hated, just with herself holding all the power. Wilhelmina couldn't share details, but she wanted me to know Jessica was making genuine progress and might actually be capable of being a good co-parent eventually. I thanked her, even though it didn't change the fact that our marriage was probably over. 3 days later, Jessica called me. I almost didn't answer. Her voice sounded different, quieter, less defensive. She apologized for everything. Really apologized, without excuses or blame. She said her therapist was helping her see how she'd used our daughter as a weapon to hurt my family because she was scared of losing control again. She told me about Christopher's mother taking over their wedding planning, choosing everything without asking what Jessica wanted. It had felt like drowning. She'd promised herself she'd never feel that powerless again. But then she got pregnant, saw my mother's excitement, and it triggered all those old feelings. Instead of talking to me, she'd built this whole strategy. She understood now she'd gone too far, become the controlling person she'd hated. She was sorry for what she'd done to my grandmother, my sister, my parents. It didn't fix our marriage. We both knew that. But it was the first time she'd taken real responsibility. 2 weeks later, both families sat down together in Wilhelmina's office for a mediation session to establish clear boundaries. Jessica's mother looked tense. My parents were cautious but hopeful. Wilhelmina explained we needed rules that worked for everyone. Jessica's mother immediately said she should be able to visit whenever she wanted during Jessica's custody weeks because she was the maternal grandmother and had a special bond. Wilhelmina gently redirected her. Both grandparents had equal importance. We spent 2 hours working through a schedule where both sets of grandparents could visit during our respective custody weeks, but everyone needed to call first and respect if it wasn't a good time. Jessica's mother struggled the most, arguing she'd been there from day one and shouldn't be treated the same as my parents who'd been excluded. But Jessica actually backed up the boundaries, telling her mother she could visit, but needed to call ahead and couldn't just show up anymore. My parents agreed without argument. We created a shared calendar. During my custody weeks, my family settled into a comfortable routine. My parents came over for dinner twice a week. My sister video called every Sunday morning. My grandmother visited every Sunday afternoon, holding her great-granddaughter, telling stories about when my father was young. The baby was thriving. She'd smile when my mother picked her up, reach for my father's glasses, gotten used to my grandmother's soft voice. My mother told me one evening that she was grateful we'd fought for this, even though it cost us our marriage. Our daughter would grow up knowing she was loved by everyone, not just one side of her family. 6 months after that terrible day when I'd first taken the baby to meet my parents, I was living in my own apartment. Jessica and I had a functional co-parenting relationship, better than our marriage had been. We exchanged the baby every Sunday evening. The handoffs were quick, just updates. Both families had regular access. Nobody needed permission anymore. Jessica had even apologized to my grandmother directly, calling her one afternoon. My grandmother had cried and forgiven her immediately. That's the kind of person she was. Our daughter would grow up in 2 households instead of 1. It wasn't the life I'd imagined when we got married. But she'd know both her families loved her. Sometimes, that's the best outcome you can hope for when adults make mistakes that can't be undone. When the damage to a marriage is too deep to repair, but you can still build something functional for your child. I was sad our marriage hadn't survived, sad my daughter would grow up going back and forth. But I was proud I'd stood up for my family's right to know their granddaughter. Proud I hadn't backed down when Jessica tried to use our baby as a weapon. Have you ever faced a situation where you had to fight for your family like this, even if it meant sacrificing a relationship you once cherished? Tell me what you think, I really want to know.